Welcome to the Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carahsoft on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guest today is Randy Wood, the Vice President of U.S. Public Sector Sales for Akamai. Randy, welcome to the program.
Jason, good to be here.
Before we get started, let me set a little context for our discussion. Federal Chief Information Officer Suzette Kent has mentioned several times over the last year about a new Zero Trust pilot kicking off sometime in the near future. What it entails, how it will work, well, that's still unclear. But the growth of this concept of creating a network that trusts no one and every user must be authenticated is real. The idea of Zero Trust networks dates back to the concepts first detailed when public key infrastructures, or PKI, common access cards, CACs, personal identity verification, PIV cards, really came into the federal market almost 20 years ago. The idea was to have one authoritative source of an employee's identity that is connected to specific roles and responsibilities when it comes to applications and data. Now, Zero Trust means a lot more than just identity. It's a way to move the perimeter defenses out to the edge of the person versus just the network. Because with the ever-growing list of devices connected to your agency's network, the emergence of OT, or operational technology, not just information technology, and as the cyber threat and wide acceptance of cloud computing continues to grow, enabling a Zero Trust network is not only possible, but absolutely necessary. And that's where my guest comes in. Well, he'll tell us why Zero Trust architecture is so important and how we can get there. Once again, my guest is Randy Wood, the Vice President of U.S. Public Sector Sales for Akamai. So, Randy, let's start at the beginning. Zero Trust, how do you define it? Let's give just a little bit more background than what I gave.
Yeah, but by the way, that was a great comprehensive definition and background for sure. So, Zero Trust, as you mentioned, is not new. It's a 5-year-old concept, sort of came out of Forrester analyst 5 years ago, and it's really it's a simple idea with respect to cybersecurity that trust is not an attribute of a location. That is, just because someone is inside a trusted perimeter, we should not grant them trust to all applications and all data. Zero Trust also is based on the idea that we're operating under an old, outdated paradigm with respect to network security. That is, the network and the perimeter have traditionally defined the boundaries of security. And we know that the way that the government's working today in a cloud, on-prem, hybrid sort of fashion, that model doesn't work. That's not representative of how government employees do their work, where they reside or where those applications reside. So Zero Trust is just what you stated. It's the idea of trust no one, trust no device, trust no application, and authenticate and authorize absolutely everyone, independent of where they are or what device they have.
One of the things about this idea of trust nobody, but the boundaries have moved, I think it goes a long way toward this idea of what defense means, right? This idea that the when and if, right? It's not when you'll be hacked. It's not if you'll be hacked. It's when you'll be hacked.
That's right.
And then this idea also of the weakest link is the person. What will you click on? What, not necessarily the weakest link is the hacker that breaks into your network or the port. So is that the emergence of Zero Trust is in many ways reaction to this changing landscape, as you said, cloud, hybrid cloud, and the like. Is that why people are paying more attention today?
Yeah, and I think for sure, but also I think it's the importance of the application. Really, increasingly, the application is the lifeblood of the organization, right? It's all about, in terms of how we do our jobs, how the government agencies do their jobs, it's increasingly application focused. And so what really comes to the surface then in this sort of new paradigm is two things: identity and applications. And so let's authenticate and let's create authorization based on identity on an application by application basis. And that's different than how we'd previously operated, the sort of conventional paradigm that we know for the last 15 or 20 years.
That's a big change for agencies. Are you seeing them get their head around this? I mean, we hear about Zero Trust a lot in the community. You go to a conference and there's a panel, but do agencies really understand what that means?
I don't think so. This is a huge change in how we think, how we architect, how we solve this problem. And so, the first step for a lot of agencies is to admit, and this is a big admission, that the way we've been doing things, what we've been doing with respect to security in this firewall VPN-centric world is today not the right way to do it. That's a huge admission for someone to make, because our thinking has been so in such supportive of how this has been done for the last 20 years.
Do you get a sense of why then we're talking about it now? What has changed? Is it just the cloud? I mean, everything can be blamed back to the cloud.
Well, so I suppose for a couple reasons, the cloud to be sure. I mean, this, the government itself is legitimizing the movement to the cloud. It's happening. And what's more, the government and government agencies are under attack. And the attackers are increasingly creative and finding new vulnerabilities. And again, the traditional perimeters, these firewall VPN-centric perimeters are simply not the answer in this application-centric world. And so I think it's something we've talked about for a few years with respect to technology and zero trust implementation. These are things that we can do today. There's technology that's making this a reality.
One of the things about the why now question also I think can tag back to this acceptance of again, I'll go back to the hackers are coming. We've seen this huge increase of the number of attempts, the number of attacks, and there's only the moat, right? And the walls can only be so high, the moat can only be so deep, and eventually someone's going to get across. And if you can cordon off your network, this idea of protect the grand jewels, right? The crown jewels. That seems to be what's also driving this, is this, if you will, sense of OPM breach, the government's push towards, we understand really what's high valued. Is that the other piece of this, that there's a better understanding of what the government needs to protect and why they need to protect it?
Absolutely, for sure. We learned a lot about the OPM breach. It's, we've talked about it, we've studied it. There's a lot of thinking that, a zero trust implementation, while maybe it wouldn't have eliminated that, it would have certainly given better defensive posture. So I do think this idea of crown jewels, understanding and protecting the crown jewels, and having a better understanding is certainly at play here. But again, I go back to the application and what's under attack, and how we can use technology to protect the very things that we interact with every day as part of our job, and it's that application sort of centric view of how we do our jobs.
I want to put maybe a finer point on zero trust as well, and maybe you can help me with this. Zero trust is not a new technology. It's not a new concept in the sense of like, put this zero trust thing in your network and you'll be better. It's really an umbrella term, and maybe talk about what comes under that umbrella.
Well, and so I think it probably depends on who you ask, right? From industry, there's a number of approaches to zero trust and developing zero trust architectures. For Akamai, the way we go about this is an identity-aware proxy architecture. That's different than how a firewall-centric company might do it, but it's all about providing a proxy network application in the cloud that's identity-centric, that provides authentication and authorization, again, on an application-by-application basis. So I suppose the answer depends on who you ask. If you ask the guy from Akamai, it's that. It's a cloud-based proxy focused on two things: identity and applications.
And it also deals, because one of the things that's been explained to me, and I thought this was interesting, is that if you look at a lot of the current initiatives from the federal government, whether it's the Continuous Diagnostics Mitigation Program or even TIC, which everyone loves to hate, or even if you look at the HSPD 12, PIV cards or Common Access cards, those are also fit under this umbrella of zero trust. It's each of the pieces creates a zero trust network.
That's right.
And I think that's what's impressed me, is that the government, no one has done a zero trust architecture or a zero trust network, but they all are putting the pieces in place. Is that what you're starting to see with your customers?
That is absolutely what we're starting to see. Again, some of this technology driven, right? 3 years ago, maybe we didn't have the technical competency in terms of products and solutions to do it, and we do today. So we're having new and different and compelling conversations with customers, and based on that, the reality of this, customers are starting to understand and increasingly consider going about security architectures in a different way. Again, it's not just firewall VPN centric. In fact, at Akamai, we're fond of, it's almost a level of audacity. We say at some point we're going to eliminate the firewall, right? That's how irrelevant that becomes in our security posture, because we're adopting this zero trust architecture, which is focused on things other than what's defined that traditional security perimeter.
What kind of conversations are you having with your federal customers about zero trust today?
That it's It's a reality. It's a reality again in terms of products. That our point of view is application proxy is a cloud-based application proxy is the right approach. Again, on that application by application basis, but it's also a layered approach, right? It's not just one thing, and I think you hit on this a little bit, Jason. It's a number of things in terms of protecting DNS, thwarting malware attacks, bot protection, web application firewall. So it's not just one thing together. It's having a comprehensive layered security conversation with our customers, which is different than the way they've thought about and implemented security in the past. So it's not just one thing. It's a number of things that contribute, like you said, to a better zero trust architecture and security posture.
Is that hard for your customers to get their head around, this idea that we have to do something different than the past? And you think it would be easy because the past hasn't worked quite well enough.
It is. It's hard. It's because we've always thought about it one way. I spent almost 15 years at Cisco, and in the early days talking about security and perimeter and firewalls, and that was the way it was. And this is a lot of customers have thought and implemented architectures built on that. So it's hard to change or think about changing that. It's heresy in some ways to think differently. What do you mean I have to get rid of a firewall and I do this differently? So it's a hard conversation. It's a tough journey. Interesting. It's a market by market conversation. So the state, local, and higher ed market is, and especially the higher ed market, is responding in some ways and more aggressively and moving out at a faster pace. They understand in higher ed, just DNS attacks alone. Malware in enterprise organizations, 90% of how malware moves is through DNS. So getting a better handle on managing your DNS is really important in the higher ed space for obvious reasons. So that factors into a zero trust architecture.
And just to put a finer point on that as well, for our audience who maybe aren't as familiar, you're talking about really network hopping, right? If I can get into your DNS and you're connected to 18 other networks, I can hop to look for the crown jewels.
That's right. Exactly.
Okay. I appreciate that, because sometimes we get lost in the not just the acronyms, right? If this was a DoD conversation, but also the technology.
Sure.
One of the things when you talk about zero trust, it's not just a cybersecurity benefit. There's a business benefit as well. Maybe describe a little bit about what some of those business benefits are.
Yeah. So one that really, a couple stand out. The first one to me is the move to the cloud is real. And so adoption of zero trust concepts and technologies really accelerates this move to the cloud, this adoption of cloud technology. Again, because your applications aren't residing where they typically were, nor are your users. Increasingly in the federal government, work is what we do, not where we go. And so we need access to our application sort of independent of time and space and the device in front of us. And so zero trust really supports that. Second is, it tends to, a cloud-based proxy approach to zero trust tends to help eliminate these massive, complex, equipment-intensive security architectures, right? Because you're moving this into, again, a proxy cloud-type solution. It also, there's no uncertainty about a shortage of security professionals. And so that helps really solve that problem for a lot of organizations moving forward. The final point I'd make is with respect to time to understanding a breach, zero trust architectures provide a lot of insight there, because you're tracking on an application by user by application process. So you get far more insight into what's occurring in your security posture in your security organization on an application basis. And so the time to understanding the breach is greatly reduced.
And is this because so much of this is, and I'm going to throw a term out there, SDN, software-based, software-defined networking, so much of this is based on the software?
Yeah, it is. It becomes a very software-intensive solution, to be sure.
Right. All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we can talk a little bit more about why Zero Trust Network is so important. You're listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carahsoft on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network.